at a time when everybody in the West believes that the world is deglobalizing, retreating, and to some extent the report confirms that in 2025 the world has regressed in terms of openness. But what of course is equally important is that it is now the Western countries, especially the United States, that are afraid of globalization, and now it's the Asian countries that are embracing globalization. Now this is the exact opposite of a world that was there 30, 40 years ago. I remember when I was ambassador to the UN from 1984 to 89, the German ambassador very proudly told the countries of the developing world, he said, if you want to develop, it's very simple. Just develop the ability to manufacture towels and make sure you can deliver them at the right price, at the right quality, at the right time, and then you'll be successfully developed. But he said it with such great confidence that only the West could do this kind of manufacturing. And of course the rest would struggle at it. But now the world has turned 180 degrees, and many people in the West are frightened of globalization. Whereas by contrast, the Asian countries who have now benefited the most from globalization are now embracing it, which is why it's actually very good that China is producing the Global Openness Report.
Well, this is your first time to be here at CIE, right, sir? This is quite an integrated setting. I didn't know whether you get a chance to walk around a little bit, and how do you feel about the expo so far?
Well, I can tell you that it's quite amazing that the only country to organize an international import expo
Yes, this is the one of its kind.
It's China. And it's interesting that the Western countries, actually, which, to be fair to them, used to import lots of products from the rest of the world. They could have organized an import expo also, but they didn't do so. And I think it's good that China is doing so, and it's good that China, for example, is now imposing 0% tariffs on products from Africa, for example.
That's right.
And I think that's a major contribution that China is making towards the development of Africa, because at a time, as you know, in the year when the United States has increased tariffs on many countries in the world, including African countries, it's good for China to announce it's going to have 0% tariffs. The whole world was very relieved that the meeting went off well, because the people were very afraid that at this first ever meeting between President Xi and President Donald Trump, after President Donald Trump was re-elected this second time, things could have gone wrong. So the fact that you had a successful outcome was, I think, good for China, good for United States, and good for the world. The fact of the matter is that China now does more trade with the rest of the world than the United States does. I mean, this is a fact, okay? And at the same time, countries around the world increasingly are relying on China to provide many of the critical, essential parts they need for their own manufacturing back home. So clearly, China has integrated itself with the world in a very deep fashion. So when the United States tries to decouple from China, it may find it is actually not just decoupling from China, it's decoupling from China and the rest of the world. I've always argued that it would be wiser for the United States to stop trying to prevent the rise of China, because the rise of China will continue. Instead, it should find ways and means of working with China in a mutually beneficial way. And frankly, it is also in America's interest to see the rest of the world develop and grow, which is what China is trying to do by sharing its prosperity with the rest of the world. The first person to alert me to the fact that China thinks long-term and strategically was Henry Kissinger. And in fact, I got his permission to cite him in my book as China One for saying that it is China that has a comprehensive long-term strategy. At the same time, I think what you mentioned about the 5-year plans is very much part of that long-term strategy. I do remember that there was a time when many economists were saying, especially when the Cold War ended, they said, hey, 5-year plans are a thing of the past. They're so old-fashioned. You must get rid of them. Let the markets do everything, right? That was the conventional wisdom. But now look at this. Now we learn that markets alone are not enough to make long-term decisions. The markets don't think long-term. And which is why you need 5-year plans. He's a good friend of mine. He's in Harvard, Amartya Sen. He said for countries to develop, you need the invisible hand of free markets and the visible hand of good governance. And that's the secret of China's development model. That it has an invisible hand of free markets. Some of the competition in EVs, in batteries, is so astounding, vicious competition, amazing. And yet at the same time, you still have a strong guiding hand of the government, making sure that the markets don't go off course. So that's why I think it's good that China is continuing with its 5-year plans. And then for the next one, I think the emphasis on high quality development is a very wise decision. Because right now it's not just about growth per se. It's about the quality of the growth, the impact on the environment, impact on people's lives. And it's good to look at everything comprehensively. And therefore, I wish these 5-year plans great success. Well, I've not just seen robots in exhibitions. I went a few weeks ago to Shenzhen and actually went to visit a small factory manufacturing robots and actually watched a robot dance. Very impressive. And one statistic which I always tell my friends from overseas is that if there's one country that is preparing for the future well, it is China. Because 1 in 6 human beings in the world is Chinese. But 1 in 3 robots in the world is Chinese. Oh, really? And 1 in 2 baby robots being born every day is Chinese. So China is producing far more robots than any other country is. So clearly it is preparing for the world of the future when we will have, for example, labor shortages as you develop an aging society. So China is wisely investing in robots. But I hope that China will also share its learning and expertise with other countries also. Because the robots like that can also be helpful even to developing countries. Because you can enhance the productivity of their populations, of their factories, and so on and so forth. So the world should be happy that China is leading the world in manufacturing and producing robots. I guess 2 leading journals in the United States on international relations. One is Foreign Affairs, and the other is Foreign Policy. And last year, I co-authored an article with 2 other co-authors saying that all the efforts to stop China's scientific and technological development will fail. And it has failed always. For example, the Soviet Union tried to prevent the spread of nuclear technology to China. China developed its own. The United States didn't want to share its technology on its International Space Station with China. China developed its own space station. So clearly, efforts to stop China in the area of scientific innovation and technological development have failed. And so it'd be wiser for the West including United States, to work with China rather than to try and stop China's development. I've launched my memoirs this week in China, called Living the Asian Century. And the first chapter of my memoir is called Born Poor.
I know.
The second chapter is called Still Poor.
I know. I read those chapters.
So I mentioned that because I've experienced real third world poverty.
When you were
we grew up in a house where there was no flush toilet.
with a rent of $17.6.
$17. Wow, I'm impressed. You can remember that, $17.60. That number was very useful for me because there are 1,760 yards in a mile.
Oh,
and I could remember that because the rental of my house was $17.60. We had debt collectors coming to our house. I was technically at that time undernourished and so on and so forth. I mention all that
Yes.
not to try and solicit pity or sympathy. I want to mention that for one reason. Unless you have experienced poverty yourself, you have no idea how painful it can be, how helpless you can feel when you don't feel that you have enough money to survive for the next few days, I mean, that's a terrible condition to be in, poverty, right? I've experienced it. I know it. So for a country like China to lift 800 million people out of poverty, the sense of personal liberation that people get when they escape poverty is so powerful. I experienced it. I came out of poverty. I can understand how these 800 million people feel. And so this sense of personal liberation is enormous. Now, it takes an incredible amount of good governance to eradicate poverty. And show clearly China has done some things exceptionally right to be able to rescue so many people from poverty. And if we can move into a world 10 to 20 years from now where every country in the world replicates what China has done and eradicates poverty, then we would have improved the human condition dramatically. And that's why China's governance needs to be studied carefully by all the countries in the world. There are several streams why the West distorts the story on China, demonizes China, which I think is very unwise. One is, of course, the West can feel that it is losing power. The West has been dominant for 200 years. They're used to being on top of the mountain. And now suddenly they find that in many fields, China is outperforming them. And that creates real, genuine anxiety. Well, I think certainly the Global Governance Initiative is very, very timely. Because at the end of the day, the human condition is undergoing a dramatic transformation. Planet Earth is like a spaceship, right? It's the only planet we have. So we must come together, and that's why you need to strengthen institutions of global governance. Well, I mean, I remember the speech very well, especially the part when he said that China hesitated, but then it plunged into the ocean of globalization. China struggled to swim, it drank water, and then finally became stronger. And that was a very powerful imagery. And I have recommended that speech to many of my friends in the developing world. And I believe that any developing country that wants to grow and develop should emulate China's example and plunge into the ocean of globalization, struggle to swim, drink water, but in the end you'll be stronger. And I do hope that even though right now there is some backtracking in some Western countries against globalization, that they'll wake up and realize that actually for them to grow and prosper too, they must once again plunge into the ocean of globalization. Well, I mean, he has been able to keep China strong and stable as China is experiencing probably one of its biggest geopolitical contests ever. I mean, there's no doubt that the United States, or there are many, to be clear, there's a very strong consensus within the United States that the United States should stop China from becoming number one. So when a country is under such pressure, you do need a very strong leader to make sure that the country survives such a contest. And that's what President Xi has been able to provide. I was helped by the fact that I actually grew up in a British colony in Singapore. And I mention that because unless you have lived in a society that is colonized, you don't understand how brutal colonization can be. So as a child, my brain, my mind was psychologically colonized by the British, to the extent that I believe as a child that I, as a brown person, I was inferior to the white person who was naturally superior to me. That is what colonial rule does. The way the Europeans were able to colonize the whole world is that they made the people that they colonized think that they were inferior. And that's how 100,000 Englishmen could effortlessly rule over 300 million of my Indian ancestors 100 years ago. Now, I lived through that mental colonization, but when I came out of it, right, I felt this incredible sense of liberation. I also began to realize that Asian societies are as good as Western societies. They're not inferior. But I didn't want to keep this insight to myself. I wanted to share this insight with my fellow Asians. I was born a Hindu. I grew up in Southeast Asia. And then, I was born a Sindhi. My surname, Mahbubani, comes from an Arabic Persian word that means Mahbub, that means beloved.
Oh.
And the script I wrote in as a child was the Arabic script. So you see, I have this personal cultural connection with all corners of Asia. And that gives me the confidence to speak about the Asian story.